All right, today we're diving into a pretty radical idea. We're going to explore an argument that suggests the social safety nets many of us rely on are actually built on breaking one of the Ten Commandments. Yep, we're talking about you shall not covet and its surprising connection to modern welfare. It's a perspective that's definitely going to challenge how you think about our society.
So let's just put the main question right out there. What if the whole system we see as a moral good, our social safety net, is fundamentally based on a broken commandment? Posing the question this way, well, it forces us to look at something we totally take for granted from a completely different and pretty uncomfortable angle.
The perspective we're digging into here suggests that this is one of those blind angles of life, an idea that's been hiding in plain sight all along. So let's start unpacking this controversial idea.
Okay, first things first, we've got to be on the same page about what covetousness even means in this context. It's not just about wanting something nice. It's about desiring what other people have. And that desire is fueled by some pretty negative stuff: jealousy, selfishness, and just a general feeling of discontent. This distinction is absolutely crucial for the entire argument.
And here is the central claim. The argument is that our modern system has managed to weave this covetous practice so deep into its fabric that we've all become participants, maybe without even realizing it. So, how in the world does a personal feeling like coveting become this massive public system? Well, the source uses a really simple analogy to connect the dots. Let's walk through it step by step.
The analogy starts with a premise I think we can all agree on. If you literally walked over to your neighbor's house and just took their stuff to meet your own needs, that's pretty clearly coveting, right? It's a direct action. Simple enough.
Okay, now let's add a little twist, a layer of separation. What if you didn't do it yourself? What if you hired a guy to go take the money from your neighbor for you? The argument here is that just because you've outsourced the dirty work, it doesn't change the morality of what's happening. It's still coveting. And this is where the analogy really hits home. What happens when that someone you've hired is the government? When we all vote for a system that uses the force of law to collect money from our neighbors and then gives it to others? The big question is, does turning it into a system with laws and bureaucracy actually change the fundamental nature of the act itself?
So, this slide really gets to the heart of the debate. On one hand, you have the common defense, right? That we all consent to the system just by living in it, and because we all contribute through taxes, we have a right to take from it. But the critique is pretty sharp. It argues that we don't really consent. We're just born into a system of force, and that the security it promises is actually a kind of deception that comes at a very high moral cost.
And this brings us to a really key distinction in this whole argument: the difference between what's called forced charity and what's called true charity. And you know what it all boils down to? One simple thing: choice.
Wow, this quote from the source really just lays it all out there. The point is, if giving isn't voluntary, if you have no say in how much you give or where it goes, can we even call that charity? From this perspective, it's not charity at all. It's something much harsher: extortion, giving under duress.
And this whole argument is really grounded in a specific theological viewpoint. The point being made is that true biblical charity has to come from the heart. It has to be given freely, without any obligation or outside pressure. It's all about your internal motivation, not just the external act of money changing hands.
Okay, so if we follow this line of thinking to its conclusion, what are the consequences? Well, the source we're looking at outlines a whole list of what it sees as the negative side effects that come from a system of forced charity. And these alleged side effects are pretty far-reaching. The argument is that this system gives way too much power to other people and to governments. It weakens our personal muscles of charity because, hey, we're outsourcing that job. It's also claimed it causes division, making people bite one another to compete for benefits. And ultimately, it asks us to trade our God-given free will for a false sense of security. This whole critique gets tied back to a specific warning. You see, governments are often called benefactors, helpers. But the source argues that their systems of forced collection are actually a form of lording over the citizens. And that's the very thing Christ warned his followers they should never, ever do.
So, after laying out this pretty heavy critique, the source doesn't just leave us hanging with the problem. It actually proposes an alternative path, something it calls the way of God's kingdom.
And the core principle here is a flat-out rejection of the idea that the ends justify the means. From this perspective, even if your goal is super noble, like taking care of the poor, using what's seen as a flawed coercive system to get there is still the wrong path. The how matters just as much as the what. So what does this different path actually look like in practice? Well, the source lays out 4 basic steps. It all starts with a personal choice: to love your neighbor by sharing what you have freely. Next, it requires a huge shift in mindset, learning to trust in God's provision, not the state's. Then comes the active part, rebuilding those muscles of charity that have gotten weak. And finally, choosing to be part of a different kind of community, one that's structured differently from the world systems. Now, the source is really upfront about this. This is not the easy route. It's described as the narrow path, but it's also framed as the very thing that our souls are hungry and thirsty for, a path that provides true meaning and purpose, even if it means going against the grain of the entire society around you.
And so that brings us full circle, right back to a deeply challenging question. It's a question about where we place our trust, what security really means, and what we might have given up along the way. Have we given away our God-given free will and made government our father? That's a provocative thought to leave you with.